Hey everybody, it's Justice for Comics. It decided to do a video on the subject of will comics survive the current crisis? And more importantly, is the comic book industry dying or is it soon to die? It seems like I've covered it on my channel a few times. It does seem like there's a lot of opinions on the matter, there's a lot of articles written about it. There's a lot of YouTube channels talking about the demise of comic books, or at least comic book stores. So I'll give you my opinions and analysis. We're going to look at this article. It goes into some detail regarding, the comic books, the history of comic books, kind of the importance of comic books today. And I do think they're important. I love comic books. I've been buying comic books probably since the age of 12 or 13. Off and on, not hardcore the whole time. As many people my age, I'm in my late 40s. I was pretty heavy into comic books in my teenage years, and then was more interested in girls and other things at some point. So yeah, your focus changes. Maybe you start going into a career, so you're kind of, it's kind of common for someone to come in and out of comic books, right? Sometimes people sell off their entire collection, then end up buying a lot of it back. I mean, I've heard those stories over and over again. Yeah, I kind of did that. I sold off a lot of my real expensive books about 13, probably 14, 15 years ago. I've told that story. I had some big books back in the day, and I had to sell them for financial reasons. And yeah, I've been trying to buy some of them back. In the last couple of years, I've definitely increased my buying, especially older issues, key issues, things like that. So yeah, I'll give you my opinion. So first of all, this article is fairly recent. This came out in May of this year, so just about a month ago, a little over a month ago, May 20th. So the thing that prompted this article was obviously one of the things that happened very recently was Diamond Comics is having problems. DC decided to not distribute their comic books through Diamond, and of course that led a lot of people to think that, well, if Diamond goes down, so will the comic book industry as a whole. And of course, they talk about the fact that many shops were not open. I mean, nothing's essential businesses have been open ever since the virus started, but obviously comic books are not really considered essential businesses. So almost most of them across the country have been shut down. There's some stores that might have done curbside service. So there's creative ways to still be in contact with your customer. But let's face it, the average shop, I'd say the average comic book shop survives with foot traffic, right? People come into the store, they pick up their weekly subscription of comic books, and maybe while they're there, they'll buy a few other things. Maybe they'll buy a statue, maybe they'll buy a Funko Pop, and a lot of the comic book shops survive from the ancillary business that they get from their comic book subscription customer. So, obviously the comic book subscription customer is important. There is some income made off of comic book subscriptions. I would say that it's very low. I've talked to a lot of shop owners over the years. Their margins are pretty thin. I would say the average comic book store shop owner buys his comic books between, I would say, around a 55 to 58% discount. So, they're getting it, let's say roughly, just for easy math, they're getting each comic book for about half. So the average comic book today sells for $3.99. Their cost is $2, and they sell that comic book, they're making a $2 profit. So obviously, to make a good deal of money to pay the rent and to all the expenses involved in having a retail store. Certainly, there needs to be a pretty good volume of comic book sales to to pay the bills, right? Just to pay the bills. So you're seeing more and more comic book stores go on eBay now. I mean, there's been I think what's happened is, so comic book shops aren't really dying; they're transforming. Let's face it, especially with what's going on, it's so easy right now. Like if there's a comic book that I really want to buy, so let's, for instance, there's a comic book I'm looking to buy eventually. I have to find the right deal and the right price, and I've got a budget for it, but I'd like to buy an X-Men 101. That's the first appearance of the Phoenix. So it's a key book. It's definitely a major key in the Bronze Age of Bronze Age of comic book buying, into the Bronze Age, beginning of Copper Age. It's a key book, a Chris Claremont run. It's one of those books that, no doubt about it, every hardcore collector, especially if you're an X-Men fan, would love to have that book in their collection. And so there's a couple ways I could do it, right? I could canvass all the different comic book shops, which would be an arduous process. It would probably take me a lot of time. I could call around first and say, hey, do you have an X-Men 101 for sale? And, I would say if I called 10 shops, I'm in Tampa, Florida here, so I think there's probably 4 to 5 stores in the Tampa market, maybe 6, maybe 11 or 12 if you consider Brandon and Clearwater and all the surrounding areas around Tampa. But let's say a dozen stores, roughly, in the Tampa, Brandon, Clearwater market. So roughly a 30 square mile, there'll be maybe 10 to 12 shops. So I could drive around to each shop and walk in and sort of just ask them if they have that book. Or obviously I could phone ahead and call each of the shops and just inquire, hey, do you have an X-Men 101 for sale? And then the shop owner would say, yeah, we do. Okay, okay, great. So I've got to get in my car. I got to drive to the shop. I mean, from where I live right now, I think the nearest comic book shop's at least 20 to 25 minutes away. So I don't have one right around the corner. There used to be one right around the corner, and unfortunately that shop closed down and went out of business. So it's sort of that inconvenience of, if I really want to track down that X-Men 101, there's a lot of legwork involved. I got to make phone calls. Then I got to go see the shop to see the book in person. Now, there is an advantage to looking at a book in person versus going on eBay and looking at, hopefully, high scanned or decent photos of the particular book. But on a high-end book, if I want to buy a graded copy, I don't really need to. I mean, I guess some people get picky about their graded books. Like, if they buy a graded book, not only do they want to make sure the graded case is clean and not damaged and no scuff marks, but they want to, does that graded book, does it present well in the case? Does it have good centering? There's things like that to take into consideration, and I get that. I'm kind of picky that way too. But for the most part, it's so much easier, right? It's so much easier to go on eBay or to go on an online store. Most of the eBay sellers that are pretty good and been doing it a while, they're very good at producing very high quality photos of the book. So even if you're buying a raw copy, if I sell a book on a comic book on eBay, I'm taking a full picture of the front cover, full picture of the back cover, and then I'm taking close-ups of each corner. I'm giving somebody a very, very good look at that comic book. Now, I'm not opening up the book and taking pictures of each page and things like that. But for the most part, most people care about the cover and the back cover less so, a little less so. But For the most part, they're just looking at the condition of the book, especially the cover. Does it have spine ticks? Are the edges nice and sharp? No creases. Those are the kinds of things I'm looking for. I like a high grade copy, but to make things easier, if I'm going to spend a good deal of money on an older key, I tend to want to buy a graded book. I'm not a big proponent of getting all my comic books graded. I mean, I see YouTubers with brand new books that just came out a couple weeks ago, modern books, and yeah, maybe there's something key in that book. But either way, they're grading $15, $20 books, and I just think that's completely insane. I don't understand why someone would do that, but hey, to each his own. I'm not going to tell somebody how to collect. I'm going to tell you how I collect, and I think most people kind of agree with my philosophy of collecting. I don't think there's anything wrong with buying a graded book, especially if you're concerned about restoration. Has the book's older. Certainly, the older the book, the higher chance it has of being restored. Things that would be a risk, right? So to eliminate that risk, you're buying a graded book to do that. And of course, you're paying more money, right? Raws typically sell a lot less than a graded book. But with a graded book, you know what you're getting. And you sometimes, if you buy a raw copy, you run that risk. I mean, I bought a raw copy of Amazing Spider-Man number 300 recently. That was my big key purchase. That was a book I've been looking at for a long time. And I found an auction. The auction was not getting a lot of attention, not a lot of bids, and I got a good deal on that book. I bought a nice, what I consider to be a 9.2 to 9.4 range in raw condition. I got it for like $350. So that book should have sold at least $100 higher than I paid for it. So I got a really, really good deal on that book. When I got the book, I was a little nervous because, of course, I had detailed pictures on the auction and on the eBay seller's page. I could see quite a bit of detail on the book, but you don't always know until you get it in hand. And of course, when I got it in hand, I took a long time. I did the thorough review of the book, and sure enough, it came in even better than I thought it was. So it doesn't always work that way, and that's one of the advantages of having eBay. I don't know. There's some comic book shops, you buy a comic book and you go home later and you decide you don't like it, or you see something wrong with the book. There's not a lot of comic book shop owners that would readily refund your money, especially because you're now pointing out a flaw in the book, maybe that the shop owner can say, well, that wasn't on the book before, right? So, eBay gives you that buyer, and that's one of the problems with selling on eBay is, I've had it happen to me a couple times, but I've had, out of all the sales I've had on eBay, I would say less than 5% I've ever had problems with. So, it's not something to be too concerned about. But when you're a buyer, you do have that protection that, if something is misrepresented, or, you get a book that's definitely not in the condition that you have the opinion of when you looked at it on eBay, you have the ability to return it. Usually within 30 days or so, you can return it, and maybe have to pay shipping to return it back to the seller, but you will be refunded your money. eBay guarantees that. So that's a great thing. So if you think about it today, the comic book shops, why are they in trouble? Well, they're in trouble because of convenience, right? It's the same reason a lot of businesses are in trouble because of Amazon. It's so easy to just go on your laptop or on your phone and pull up the app and start looking at whatever you want to buy. There's some exceptions. I think some things like clothes, usually most people want to try things on and make sure it fits and, that kind of thing. But, I think eventually if you buy a particular piece of clothing that you like, how it fits, you could certainly rebuy it, that kind of thing. But comic books, it's just a different animal. If I want to buy a high grade copy of a book, like X-Men 101, I don't want to drive around to a bunch of shops, or I don't want to call around a bunch of comic book shops and have to drive down there, look at the book, look at it thoroughly, and then then I have the whole process of negotiating with the shop owner. What's he asking for it? All right, well, you take this, and I have to go back and forth. eBay, it's an auction. Most of the time, it's auctions or buy it nows, and sometimes I find great deals on buy it now where I see the grade I like and the price is right, and boom, I just go ahead and buy it and don't want to mess with an auction. And then other times, like that Venom, like the ASM 300, I got a really, really good deal by doing the auction. There just wasn't that many bidders, and I put a decent bid in at the last second, and I won it. I got very lucky. So, I've done all three. I've gone to comic book shops. I've done eBay. I've done buy it nows. I prefer to buy things online. It's just so much easier. You get the book 4 or 5 days later at a minimum, in my post office box, and it's pretty damn convenient. Especially these days, no one wants to really go out and drive. Have to put a mask on. I got to go into the shop and wear a mask, and I don't know who's been touching those comic book boxes last. There's all these things to contend with. So my point is, I know I've kind of rambled on a little bit, is comic book shops, there will be some that survive, especially a comic book shop that has a good, loyal fan base of customers. They provide great customer service. Yes, there will be some shops that will survive, no doubt about it. But I think many will not. And I think the reason many won't survive is because of just the convenience of buying things online. The example I just gave you of X-Men 101, it's just so much easier to go on eBay and look at 40 or 50 listings, or to go to a couple websites and look and find what I'm looking for, the grade I'm looking for, everything. So this article goes into a lot of detail on, they're making the contention that comic books aren't going away. They're not going to stop producing comic books. I agree with that. It's art. There's a lot of people that love heroes and comic book characters. And Superman's been around. The oldest superhero, Superman, he's been around since late 30s. It's generational, and maybe each generation doesn't appreciate it quite as much as the generation before. But I still think, there's a lot of appeal to comic books and superheroes and the genre of comic books. Now, you read a lot of studies that show that manga, for instance, is really strong, sells much better than traditional superhero comic books. But I agree with the premise of this article. Comic books are not dying. Just like it says here, music is dying, poetry is dying. Comics are art. Art doesn't die. Comics aren't dying. Comics will never die. They're never going to, I agree with that. They're not going to die. But the way that we take in comic books is changing. A lot of people read comic books digitally now. There's always going to be, I'm one of the old school guys that have been around a long time. I like to hold the comic book in my hand. I like to smell the ink. I want to have the whole experience. But there's, young people today, they're on their laptops or on their notebooks and on their phones, and they are very, very accustomed to, taking in information digitally. So, I'm speaking for myself, but when I look at my son and daughter, they have no interest in comic books. I've given my son comic books to read. He might look at them for a couple minutes, and then he puts them down, and he's back on his laptop or his iPod. He has no interest in the physical form of comic books. And maybe I can get him to read a comic book online, through his laptop. Maybe that will be more effective. But at this point, physical comic books really don't matter to him. He's 8 years old. It just doesn't have any appeal. So I just think the comic book industry is slowly transforming and changing. it's not going to die, but you're not going to see comic book sales like you had in the past, the 80s and 90s. I don't think we're ever going to be anywhere near that again. And I think you're seeing more and more comic books being sold direct, right? You've got Kickstarter, Indiegogo campaigns where it's direct from creator, so there's really no publishing going on. The publisher is the creator goes down to a local printer and prints off a bunch of comic books, and he provides them it's all digital scans. So basically, they could either do digital artwork, or they could scan in their original art pages, colored and inked and everything, and they create the digital print of the comic book. They print it out. It gets sent, boxes and stacks of comic books get sent to the creator, and they basically have a list of names and addresses from all the people that signed up to buy the comic book directly from that creator, and that's it. Boom, they slap it in a Gemini mailer and first class postage, and off it goes. That I think is, you're going to see more and more comic book creators leave Marvel and DC. And maybe Marvel and DC, I don't think those characters are ever going to go away, but maybe they end up being more licensed. Maybe other publishers or other companies will buy the licenses of these characters. The IP will always be there, but I just think that you're going to see more and more creator-funded comic book projects where people buy them online. And the one I'm going to use as an example is Cyberfrog, right? Most people that are familiar with Kickstarter and Indiegogo. Indiegogo is probably one of the best go-to places for, if you have a comic book, an idea, and you want to create a comic book, you can go to this site of Indiegogo, and basically you can post images of your comic book, and you can basically market it yourself through social media, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, all the different social media platforms. I mean, you can market yourself, right? So Ethan Van Sciver used to be a comic book guy for DC. He was an illustrator for DC. This isn't his artwork, by the way. This is Jay Lee's. Jay Lee, it looks like Jay Lee did the cover. So he basically created this character, and he's marketing it himself through his Indiegogo page. And instead of being a comic book subscriber to a store, you're a backer. So there's different levels, $10 level, $25 level, a couple of those. There's a $50 level. And basically, he ships worldwide. He'll ship them himself. He has a nice presentation. Looks like you get a box here on one of these. And this is kind of the new way to sell comic books, and it's working. His Cyberfrog Wrecked Planet campaign, right here, you can see, let me zoom in a little. He's over $1 million right now, $1,020,704. Unbelievable. 8,650 backers. So there's less than 10,000 people bought his comic book, but look how much money he's making. Now, he's got printing costs and things like that, so I would say, what's he going to net on $1 million project? Probably pretty good. What's he going to make, 70, 80 cents on the dollar? I don't think it's going to cost him more than 20 to 25 cents on the dollar to produce this comic book and all the things that go with the packaging. That's my guess. I could be totally off. I don't know. I haven't studied the financial aspects of direct comic book selling, but I would be willing. I'm willing to bet that he's making a good chunk of money on this project. Even if it was half, even if it was 50%, if he made 50 cents on every dollar on this one project, he's making over $500,000, right? If even if the margins were at that level, which I bet they're higher. So, this is probably the future of comic books. Some of these comic book creators like Donny Cates, obviously you got guys like McFarlane have been doing this for decades already. I think it's just, why would you want to work for a company like Marvel or DC where you create this awesome storyline, you own none of it, you own absolutely none of it. Marvel's going to pay you for the project, and I'm sure Donny Cates is getting paid a pretty good chunk of money. He probably has a multi-year contract. He's getting a big fat salary. He probably gets paid to attend promotional events, assuming there is any, which there isn't any right now. But is he going to make more money than Ethan Van Sciver in the long term? With Ethan owning his IP, he owns the characters that he's creating and creating comic books for. I don't think so. I think Ethan Van Sciver can make way more money in the long run than Donny Cates will. So I don't know. If I was Donny Cates, I would be coming up with my own idea. I mean, he did come out with, he's got Redneck, he has God Country, he does own those IPs. But I would just be, I don't know if it was me, I would like to play around with Thor and Spider-Man, obviously those characters, maybe do that for a while. I think that's what he's doing. I think he's having fun, building his reputation and name. And if he's smart, he'll leave. He'll leave Marvel eventually when his contract runs out. And hopefully his best ideas, he's not just handing to Marvel so that they can make money off of it. Hopefully his best ideas, he's going to produce himself, create his own IP, and he'll have millions and millions of dollars worth of value that he's not going to have working for a company like Marvel or DC. So I don't know. That's what I think the future of comic books is going to be something of this nature where there's campaigns, Kickstarter, Indiegogo, and creating your own IP, controlling your own IP, and of course making a lot of money along the way. So that's my opinion on that, guys. That's kind of what I wanted to talk about. Comic book industry is not dead. It's not dying. It's transforming. It's transforming into digital more. Comic book shops, I think many of them will go away just because, as human beings, we've become extremely comfortable with shopping online, buying things online, and that is absolutely destructive to the comic book industry. So I don't think it's anything that can be, it's not going to be recoverable. I'm not saying every single comic book shop is going to shut down. I'm not saying that at all. I think there will be many that will survive, but I think it's going to be a lot less than the numbers that are out there now. I don't know. There's probably, 3,000 comic book shops in the United States. I wouldn't be surprised if that number gets winnowed down to less than 1,000, maybe even less than 500. I know in my little town of Tampa, there's probably at least 7 or 8 comic book shops. There probably only needs to be 1 or 2, to be honest. So that's what I see as the trend. I can't predict the future, but I've been around a little bit. I've kind of watched the trends, and that's what I see coming. I think there's going to be less comic book shops, more people buying things online, probably more eBay comic book stores, right? Virtual comic book stores online through eBay, or maybe creating your own website. I think you're going to see a lot of that. But physical stores, nope. That trend, that's been set in stone. That is not coming back. That's just going to get worse and worse. And it's transforming. So it's not dying. Comic books aren't going out of business completely. They're just transforming. All right, guys, that's all I had for you. Look for my next live stream Thursday. I'll be bringing you whiskey, cigars, and comics on Thursday. I'll send out notification prior to that. So look for that. Hope you guys have a good week, and I'll see you on Thursday.